Check 1, 2.
Go! Curious about real estate? Yes! Then you've come to the right place. Get the knowledge you need, get over the fear, and get started. This is the Michael Quarles Real Estate Show with your host, Michael Quarles.
Let me ask you a question. What do you want to do?
Well, what I want to do is volunteer my time. I mean, be in a position to where I can live a boss optional lifestyle, and not for my own personal, not so I can just go fishing all day and sit on the, go to the islands and just hang out. But I want to volunteer my time. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran and see a demand there, as far as just being of service, and then just in general give back to the world. But at the same time, being able to provide for my family and myself and at a comfortable level. That's what I want, right? That's what I want. And I have a 9-to-5 now, and I have a good job and everything, but it just takes, it just takes so much away from my life, in terms of being able to do the things I really want to do, that I, need to figure out another way of being able to support myself and do the things that I really want.
Okay.
So that's my drive, and I that's on my profile, and it's true. I mean, that's what I want to do. It's actually a really positive influence if you think about it. So
sure. No, I think having a reason outside of ourselves when we look at adventure and ventures that we're going to or contemplating is it's better than just saying, well, it's because I want to do it from a greed or an ego perspective. Because at some point the funnel is so fat and the bottom of the funnel is so wide that it's going to take you there whether or not you want to go there anyway. Because I distinctively remember I've been poor, I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been rich kind of thing. First time I was rich, I didn't realize I was rich, which is kind of a weird statement. It was kind of like, well, in the invincibility of youth. The last time that I was rich, I now understood the value in it, what its purpose is for. And the paradigm shift hit me one day when I didn't need anything else. When we're so used to whatever it is we're used to, but we don't have to anymore, good things happen in everybody's life. And so I absolutely get it. I love it. But I want to ask you another question. I apologize for not asking you the right way. So what is it that you want to do?
So I am a buy and hold investor as far as my mindset is concerned. I'm looking to do my first couple of deals and on a solid foundation. So properties of reasonable quality with good tenants that I don't want to be a landlord. I just want to own the property and hire a property management firm to manage that. So a true investor, as opposed to, getting my hands dirty with the property management side of it. It's not that I'm against doing that in the future. It's just at this point, I look at the deals from that perspective. So I look at it as then, is this a good deal based on my ability to pay for the service of property management, so that's completely passive income. Following that, as far as my business plan is concerned, I do intend on looking at wholesaling and flipping options, whether it be to flip and sell or flip and keep for cash flow purposes. But that's what I want to do. Relatively naive of any new investor, and I may be speaking, out of line here, but I think it's, it's not a good idea for any new investor to immediately jump into the flipping or wholesaling business without understanding how the process works in terms of acquiring properties as an investor, holding those properties, and then having some degree of involvement in the management of those properties. And then, once that foundation is built, then obviously looking at like wholesaling and flipping transactions as I get more experience, to generate additional revenue to help pay out those properties quicker or whatever the case may be. So that's what I want. That's what I want to do.
Let me ask you a question really fast. And the answer to this, I guess there's no wrong answer. So I drive a Mercedes, and only because it's my last vehicle. Before that, it was a Hummer, and before that one, it was a Tahoe, and before that one, it was a Hummer and a Mercedes. So it's just a Mercedes. It's a nice one. I mean, it's not a bad one. It's a 2014 Mercedes, and if I offered you to buy it on the condition that you had to resell it, and you had to resell it within 7 days of buying it, you've never seen it, you don't know what it looks like, but my price to you, by the way, it's in perfect condition, my price to you is $1,000. You can't keep it. You can only sell it, and you can sell it for as much as you want. But you have to sell it in 7 days. Would you do that deal?
I would have to ask myself, is this my core competency? Is buying your Mercedes and with the intention of reselling it something that I'm good at and am capable of facilitating?
Okay. In that answer lies where you're at. Because a lot of people, if they listen to that question, would say, heck yes, and fall fast forward as they could, irrespective of their knowledge base or their core competency. Because, theoretically, if I spent close to $100,000 on my Mercedes, and I was wanting to sell it to you for for $1,000, you could easily go out tomorrow and sell it for $2,000 and double your money, and you wouldn't need any basic knowledge of automobiles or DMV or any of that kind of stuff. But because you question your core competency, for you, and it's okay, that's what I say, there's no wrong answers. For you, the learning curve won't be any slower than anybody else because pretty much everybody learns at the same rate. They just don't take action at the same rate. So your action curve is going to be a little bit slower, and that's okay. As one of those podcasts, you probably heard me say that I didn't know what I didn't know, and I made all these mistakes in the beginning, and here I sit, kind of thing. And so, but on the other side of the fence, there's folks that go and learn and learn and learn and learn, and then jump into what they feel most comfortable with and are successful. And which one is better? They're only better for the person experiencing the better part of it, kind of thing. I am not a buy and hold guy. Not that I have rentals. I am not that person. You said that you wanted to be a professional real estate investor, hands off. I applaud you because so many people, when they get into the passive income game, they get into it marginally, meaning they don't make sure the transaction can have a profitability factor great enough that they can hire property managers in that property manager then has the repair people and the classified ads and all that other stuff that ultimately the investor pays for. That said, you can't have 1,000 units and expect to change all the toilets. So you're going to max out. My experience is someone maxes out about in the 20s if they plan on being hands-on, but there's no limit if they're going to be hands-off. And then most investors who are passive income earners don't go probably the route you want to go. Most people that are passive income investors don't care what they pay for a property as long as the property produces the income factor that causes profitability. So where like I'm a massive investor and I have to make sure that there's massive amounts of equity in the property because I'm going to flip it and pull out or extract that equity base when someone gives me money at 100% of value. So I'm going to make my money now. You're going to make your money two ways: long-term income and appreciation. But you're also going to make money if you ever do a sell or a transfer because you're going to have some equity base in there as well. My experience has been, and I think that you'll find that the moment you start selling these things massively, or you have the opportunity to sell them massively, because if you buy, let's say you buy a single family and you can buy it for 40, but it's worth 90, and the 40, all expenses and everything else on that is less than $400 a month, but it'll rent out at $950 a month. Passively, that's not a bad, $6,000, $6,600 a year, not a bad thing. But you have to weigh that $6,600 in 1 year against the $50,000 minus the 8.25% costs of flipping against it. So do you want to make 40,000+ instantly, or do you want to make $6,600 a year? And if your mind is set up that you want to make $6,600 a year, that's great. And there are ways and advantages out there and ways to find those folks out there, especially in a market where if you want to be a passive income earner, you're limited at some point to how many units you can buy using your own credit and your credit worthiness. Now, naturally, yes, at some point, everybody's net earnings and their balance sheet so large that they take on a different configuration of how they qualify for a loan. However, in the beginning, we get between 10 and 14 loans, and we're pretty much done. If we start buying and marketing from an equity perspective, even though we're going to hold it passively, then you start getting into the realm of seller carrybacks and sub-2 financing, and opens that window of opportunity up considerably. That would be a good thing. And I always look at, if you're going to be a passive income earner, the cash that you apply to purchase and the conventional loan that you apply to purchase are your last two scenarios that you should look at. And the reason for that is, if you get down the road and you've got 10 notes already or 12 notes already, and you're pretty much in a stalemate on creating more passive income, and an opportunity comes, that's a bad day, a really good opportunity. But if you've bought and, all your properties so far seller financing or sub-2 financing, knowing that you can cure the sub-2 if it's ever called on the due on sell with a conventional note, and then if you have a deal that comes around that doesn't require or doesn't allow or afford seller financing or sub-2 financing, then you just use your cash or use your credit to buy it. But I think using your cash and credit, even passively, should be the last way to buy houses. For most people, it's their first way because they don't know how to buy them any other way, which is understandable. I mean, there's not an economics class taught in high school and college or junior college that talks about financing strategies. When that's how can I help? How do you think I can help you? And let's talk about that.
Well, yeah. So go over, because I cannot wrap my head around the sub-2 transactions. I haven't put a lot of thought into it. I mean, I've known about it, I've heard about it, and it sounds interesting. So, if you could go over that at some point in time in the conversation, that would be good.
So let's look at the sub-2 and let me help clarify that if I can.
Yes, please.
Traditionally, when you buy a piece of property, whether you're an investor when you bought it or an owner-occupant when you bought it, you've put down a down payment, and then you took out a loan for the difference. And so, if it's a conventional, maybe you put down 5% and you borrowed 95% of the purchase price from, let's call it Bank of America. You borrowed it at 3.75% or 4. Let's call it 4%. Make it easy numbers. So you borrow at 4%, and you live in it for 10 years. So now this 30-year loan has a 20-year call. So it's amortized over 30, 20 years left, 4% interest. It is now, and let's say originally it was worth $100,000, now it's worth $150,000. So it's gone up in 10 years, $50,000 in appreciation. Your payoff isn't 95 anymore, it's less by 10 years worth of payments. And you want to sell it. Well, traditionally, you would just list it with a real estate broker. They would offer it for sale. A buyer would come along, offer to pay cash plus loan that would cause the amount of the purchase price for them to cure all the underlying voluntary and involuntary liens. So a voluntary lien is a mortgage or a loan or a stipulated judgment. And a stipulated judgment is, say someone sued you and they won, and you asked the court to make payments to the person who won, and the court would grant that as long as you stipulated that and agreed to it. Even if it didn't go all the way to court, you could still stipulate that the other party won and that everybody's agreeing to allow you to make payments. So those are voluntary liens. Involuntary liens are like child support, taxes, mechanics liens, or judgments. So when we sell a piece of property, in this case, we're selling this house for $150,000, and there aren't any involuntary liens. The only voluntary lien that's on the property is the loan to Bank of America, and let's say that loan is now paid down to $85,000, or we'll call it $80,000 for easy numbers. So you have an $80,000 loan to Bank of America. It's worth $150,000. You're going to have some closing costs and repair costs, what have you, and real estate fees. And so you're going to make, let's say that those fees are $15,000, and so you're going to make the difference between $135,000 and $80,000. So you're going to make $55,000. But I come along, and I say, wait a second. And maybe you're having a hard time selling it. Maybe the neighborhood's not as good as it used to be. And although it's worth $150,000, it's not in the greatest neighborhood. Come along and I say, Mr. Seller, I'd like to buy your property, but rather than paying off Bank of America, can I just pay you off? And instead of going through a real estate broker, we can close all this down at the escrow title company or closing attorney, and we don't need some of those commissions and some of those other things that would be part of a realtor transaction. And so I'd like to buy it from you for the $135,000 to a subject to, so I'm going to go ahead and not assume the Bank of America loan. I'm just going to continue making mortgage payments to Bank of America, and I'm going to send you a copy of every mortgage payment that I make so you know that it's made. And you can always log on to bankofamerica.com and make sure that I'm making those. And then I can either do one of two things. I can give you all of the $55,000 when I close escrow, or you can do what we call a seller carryback. And in some cases, instead of a junior loan of $55,000, it may be in your best interest to do a wrap of a $135,000 loan, which is including the $80,000 to Bank of America. So that 4% loan that you're paying at Bank of America, you're now going to charge me, because interest is a little bit more, you're going to charge me 5.5%. But you're charging me 5.5% on 135 and only paying 4% on the 80 to Bank of America. But here's what's really cool for you. The Bank of America loan's 20 years left. Your loan to me is for 30 years. And so we have pay down rate differences. Oh yeah, and I forgot. You're going to require me to put some money down. So you're going to get that as well. So that's a subject to purchase from a seller. So they're allowing you to go ahead and just continue to make the payments. You're either going to pay them their portion, pay them some of their portion in a down payment, and have them carry the balance back as a junior note, or do a wrap, which is including the Bank of America loan. So why is that advantageous to a seller? Well, if I'm looking at a transaction and I'm a seller and I just don't want this property anymore, and people that don't want the property for the money. They don't want the property because they don't want the property. So the money equation isn't necessarily there. They just don't want the property anymore. But they also understand that the property has been worth holding their money in, right? They've been self-financing the 55 already because it is worth 150 minus the 15,000 fee cost of selling. They owe Bank of America 80. So that 55 that's left has always been their money. They've just chosen to leave it in the property and self-finance it. Well, if they're willing to self-finance it for themselves, why wouldn't they be willing to self-finance it for me? Besides, they're going to make 5.5% interest. If they took that $55,000 and put it at Bank of America, they might get 1%, 1.5%. So I'm going to pay you, 4 or 5 times what you would actually get from the bank. Well, from a seller's perspective, that's not a bad thing, because if you're just leaving the money in a savings account, although the money with you isn't as liquid as it is with Bank of America, on a T-bill, they're not that liquid. I mean, yeah, you can cash them in with penalty, but they're not extremely liquid. And if you came to me as a seller of a sub-2 transaction, and you came to me and said, Mike, I found something that I want to put my $55,000 in, and I know I took a seller wrap with you. However, can you pay me any of that? When I buy your property, we're going to have instruments within the note that allow me to pay you that and benefit you and benefit me. Your money's always liquid. Now, why would an investor do that? Well, earlier when I talked about how many times that you can actually finance something, well, this doesn't qualify, because although you are positively impacting a credit report, it is not your own credit report. Because you as the investor, when you make those mortgage payments to Bank of America, they don't show up on your credit report. They show up on the seller's credit report. So now the seller's credit FICO score is actually increasing because it appears to everybody in the credit world that they can now assume more debt and take on more responsibility, where the reality is they're not. But it's going to appear that way. So when you go to sell it, let's assume for a second now you want to be a passive income earner, but not a property owner. You don't want to sell it massively so you're making all the money. You want to sell it passively so you make money per month on the transaction. So originally, that wrap that you got from the seller at $135,000 at 5.5% interest. Keep it in mind, remember it was originally worth $150,000. You now, as the investor, are going to a buyer who possibly can't qualify for a loan traditionally, but wants to have the property and use it as their primary residence. So you're going to go to that buyer and you're going to offer a property for sale that's worth $150,000 at a value in the future that can be justified. So, and the value in the future is typically period of time that you want to call your note. So, on a regular mortgage, they're all due and payable in 30 years. Typically, there's 15-year mortgages and 10-year mortgages. And then there's some 5-year mortgages that are amortized to 30 years that are due in 60 months. But most mortgages are all due in 360 equal payments. So you're going to set your loan up with the buyer of the property that you just purchased subject to, and you're going to set it up on a 5-year note amortized on 30 years. So what is it going to be worth in 5 years? Well, if we do a chart graph and we go, okay, properties have been escalating or appreciating in value 0.75% a year. So 5 times 0.75 is 3.75% over the next 5 years. Call that 3% from a math equation perspective. That's so 3% of 150,000 is $4,500. So now you're going to take the $150,000 house, you're going to sell it for $154,500. require the buyer to give you something, 5%, 10%. But let's assume they only give you $10,000 down payment. So now you've collected $10,000 and you're selling it, so it's not a deposit. It's actually you're collecting $10,000. You are now have 10,000 minus 154,500 is 144,500 that you have now you're going to do your own subject to wrap on. So you're wrapping the seller's wrap. So the seller's charging you 5.5% on 135,000. You're charging the buyer more than the 5.5, whatever the market says you can charge. Let's call that 6. But you're charging that 6 on 144,500. So you've made $10,000 up front. When they pay you off in 5 years, you're going to make another $10,000, right? Or almost 9,500. And during the period of time, you're making 0.5% on 135,000 per year, 6% on 9,500. So over the first 5 years, you're going to be making about $23,000 income, buying something subject to, selling something subject to, and you paid 100% value of the property. Let me back up also. In the beginning of subject to investing, the majority of the subject to deals that were being done out there were being done because the seller didn't have enough equity to pay for a real estate agent to sell it traditionally. So maybe they had marginal, less than 10% equity. They economically couldn't sell it because they couldn't come out of pocket to close the transaction and use a real estate agent. It's not illegal to buy something that has a loan on it. Like the lender says in their note that they may, upon transfer of title, accelerate the due on sell clause. I've never seen one do that, but they have the right to do that. Originally, Sub 2 was formed because they had marginal equity properties, couldn't sell them traditionally, wanted to sell them. Someone said, well, now I'll just take over the loan, not assume the loan, but take it over, become responsible for the payment. And then they would turn around and either do a lease option, sell, or an outright sell, or hold it passively. So there's 3 ways to make passive income on a Sub 2 purchase, and that's renting it out, doing a lease option, which is basically rent with an option to purchase, and then do a Sub 2 seller wrap behind the Sub 2 loan or the underlying loan. And people make bucket loads of money. The problem with doing marginal Sub 2 purchases and resells is, even though I haven't seen the lender call one, they have the ability to call it. And if they have the ability to call it, then you as the lender to your buyer, because you're wrapping the loan to your buyer, your loan's in jeopardy because the lender could call the note, and ultimately the buyer's property is in jeopardy because the lender could call the property because they don't have a loan on it. So if someone can't step in and actually pay the lender off, then the lender's going to foreclose. They're going to give you a 30-day notice to perform, and then if you can't perform, they're going to call the loan. Well, when you do a subject to equity transaction, the first example where there was an $80,000 loan and the seller had $55,000 equity, and we did a $135,000 wrap. In that case, there's so much equity in the property that it's real easy in those scenarios to obtain a loan and pay off the underlying lender. So now let's look at Sub 2 massive deals. So you're marketing out there, and you're marketing for the opportunity to buy properties at 60 cents on the dollar, and you find one, and the 60 cents represents a loan with Bank of America. So you find a $100,000 piece of property that you can buy it for $60,000, and the people have a $60,000 Bank of America loan. Well, how much money do you need down? closing costs. That's all you need down because you've agreed to buy it for whatever the loan is. The moment that you own the property, you become responsible for that mortgage, although that mortgage isn't on your credit report. Now, because you're a massive income earner, at the same time, you've offered the property for sale to somebody else. That somebody else comes along, you do not allow them to purchase subject to the existing voluntary lien. You require them to cash you out, either with a new loan. They give you $100,000. You take 60 of it and pay off Bank of America. You keep 40 of it. You keep 40 of it minus your cost. That's a really fast class in sub 2 investing. So one way, you have 3 ways to make passive income, and then another way, you have 1 way of making massive income. And all 4 ways are being done all the time. The beauty of the massive income subject to is the security of knowing that you've bought it correctly really diminishes the worry of the due on sell. Because let's face it, if you buy something at 60% loan to value, the underlying voluntary lien accelerates the due on sell, you're within the number requirement or the equity requirement for a hard money lender to give you a loan without qualifying for a loan. So your worst case scenario is a higher interest rate loan, but you could still pay off your underlying lender. And then ultimately, you're going to sell it anyway. So if it takes you 90 days to sell it, it takes you 90 days to sell it, but then you have 40 grand minus the costs. So most people get into sub 2 passive deals, but when they start utilizing sub 2 for massive deals, they can do a lot more massive deals because they're not tying up that $60,000 of cash or credit during the 90-day period. So now, during that 90-day period, they could buy multiple properties and have multiple escrows going and cashing out of multiple escrows. Now, you take a situation where the purest, the best transaction you can get into, irrespective of equity base, is a 100% seller finance transaction, as long as the interest rate to the seller is reasonable. And because there's not going to be undue on sell on that, you're not going to write that in. So when you go to sell it, you can sell it without any jeopardy to your buyer, or you can sell it and pay off your seller. But one of the characteristics that really starts applying when you do seller finance transactions and you're buying equity base, so you're making massive income and you're taking seller financing, is some of those sellers don't want to be paid off. So now let's assume that you're doing 2 strategies at one time. You want to be a passive income earner for long-term gain and passive income. However, you are also buying massive deals. And the massive deals, you're only going to be buying subject to the existing loan and or seller financing, and there has to be equity base, and you're going to flip them. So you're not buying them to hold, you're buying them to sell for massive deals. Well, some of those sellers on those massive flips, they're not going to want to be paid off. They're going to ask you to do what's called exchangeable collateral. So they're going to want to take their note, their $60,000 note, and ask you to apply it to another property that you own passively. Well, what does that do for you? That allows you to buy a lot more passive properties. If I was a seller and I was selling you and I did a carryback, and then you came to me and said, Mike, I want to pay you off because I've sold the property now. And I said, but I don't want you to pay me off. I really like getting 3% interest on my $60,000. That's where I want to keep it. Do you have a property you can put it on? You should only put it on a property that's under encumbered and not encumbered more. So to start exchanging collateral with people is a real positive way for an investor who does all the calculations correctly and is a professional about it, for them to buy a bucket load of houses. And there's going to be sellers out there that'll sell you a house for zero interest rate. It's crazy. This is going to be one of the strangest sounding transactions you've ever heard. I bought a house from a homeless person. All the homeless person wanted was a monthly mortgage payment stipend to live on. So he's homeless. If he lived in the home that he owned free and clear, he wouldn't get the $450 to live on. So it was a better choice for him to be homeless, live under the bridge, literally, and collect $450 a month. So we just worked out a note where he collected $450 a month, and he was happy as he could be. He didn't want to deal with the toilets anymore. Didn't want to deal with anything. He wanted to make sure he had this money. He didn't want to worry about a bank account. Some people can't see past practicality. As long as you're not taking advantage of people. There are all kinds of good things that come from seller financing and sub-2 financing, and there are multiple strategies you can use. You can tie them together. You can leave them separate. Instead of doing wraps, you can do junior financing. Wraps are always better when you sell. They're never good when you buy, and they never want to buy under a lease option. And if you want to sell, you can sell under a lease option, but you can always grab a deed with a subject-to mortgage. But there's a whole section on subject-to. What I think is important for the seller to understand about a subject-to note and how it impacts them in a negative and a positive way. Because if you stop making payments on a subject-to note, instead of positively impacting the seller's credit report, it's going to start negatively impacting the seller's credit report. And a lot of people ask me, well, how do you get someone to say yes to a subject-to purchase? Well, one day the analogy that I used, I'm right-handed. So I'm always going to write right-handed. If I'm going to sign my name or fill out a form, I write right-handed. That's how I'm going to do it. I buy subject-to. That's how I'm going to do it. However, if I broke my right hand or I couldn't use my right hand for whatever reason, and I needed to sign something, I can sign my name with my left hand. It's not going to be pretty. It's going to be outside the lines. It's not going to be as organized, which is kind of like if I buy something and my model is I buy subject-to, I can still buy other ways, but it's not going to be as comfortable for me. It's going to be outside the boundaries of what I'm used to, much like writing left-handed or with the opposite hand. And so when you present yourself to a seller and you express to them why subject-to financing is actually in their benefit, and there's a lot of reasons it's a benefit to them, you're steadfast that that's how you do it, and you don't deviate from it, well, then that's how you do it. And it's like everything else. You know what? I came to your home, and they wanted to extract you, take you out of that home. They're not going to ring the doorbell, right? They're probably going to hit that thing and knock down the door and go get you and take you outside. Well, it's what they do. You kind of can assume that if they were going to go get someone, they wouldn't use the doorbell. They wouldn't be polite. Do you mind coming with us today? We want to arrest you, kind of thing. They're not going to do it that way. They're going to do what they do, which is when you buy subject-to, you buy subject-to. And if your mind frame has that same perspective, then it's real easy. But what happens is, and what I have found over the years is, as we can start deviating from how we buy houses, those options, because we can, interfere with how we buy houses. So it's like, then I become a switch hitter. So now I can bat left-handed and right-handed. I can write with either hand. Which one do I want to use? I'm undecided. Do I buy this massively and flip it? Do I buy this passively and retain it? When I go out to meet the seller, do I buy it with cash? Do I buy it with subject-to and seller financing? Do I get a new loan on it? It's when we start having the ability to have all the choices that the choices get in our way. Earlier in the conversation, I mentioned that buying with a conventional loan or cash are ultimately your worst two options.
Yeah.
It's for one of those factors, because if you don't take the mind frame of, although I can, I'm still not going to, unless the opportunity is so great that the opportunity outweighs me not doing it. How do you do both at the same time, and how do you substantiate economically and mentally doing both at the same time. So here's the scenario. I want to be a massive income earner and I want to be a passive income earner. And I want to do those at the exact same time. How do I decide on the houses that I buy? To me, that's really easy. I only buy houses that have massive potential. I never buy a passive house. So I never buy a house that has marginal equity. Mm-hmm. And I sell 3 of 4 that I buy. So for every time I buy 4 houses, I keep 1, sell 3. The one I keep, the 3 pay for. I'm buying them at 60 cents on the dollar or less, so I'm making 40%. 40 times 3 is 120%. I have to take 20% or half of that 120% and go buy another house. But I have 20%, and I can buy 4 houses a month. That's not hard. If you look at it that way, if you said, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm only going to buy massive transaction deals. I'm going to keep the best of the 4. So maybe it's not, like 1 out of 4. Maybe it's, well, I can keep the first one was really good. I'm going to keep this one and sell the next 5, and then I'm going to keep the 6th one and sell the next 2, and that means I have 2 out of 8 or 1 out of 4. So it's not like every 4th one. But when you do it that way, having 100% equity in property and allowing a seller to do that for you that's selling their property at a discount, that's a pretty cool thing. Especially if you have the mind frame of that I want property that will produce monthly income to me that at some point in the future I can stop. Because let's assume for a second you can buy 4 houses a month and you can keep one of them every month paid for free and clear. Right. And each one of those earn you $1,000, and you have to pay taxes and insurance and vacancy and whatever fees that you have. But let's just say that's only 30%. So now you have $700 a month, but you have 12 of those. So in a year you make $8,400 a month in income. We'll do that for 2 years. That what is that? 16.8. Well, you 16.8 times 12. That's $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
For 2 years of life, but you still made pretty good money in the meantime. And then you have all these, all this passive income that's being offset by depreciation, and I mean you're going to be good to go.
I mean, I love the sub-2 process and the benefits of it to the seller, myself, and ultimately the buyer. But why do sub-2s when you can essentially do the same thing? And from my understanding, again, being novice, the way I see it is, why do sub-2 when you can do essentially the same transaction with a wholesale deal and accomplish the same end result?
It's not. No, because a wholesale deal, the true definition of a wholesale deal is selling something less than value. Like if you go to Costco, they'll brag they'll brag that they're a wholesale box store kind of thing where you can buy it less than where you could buy it someplace else. Most wholesalers are really assigners. So they put something under contract. So they buy that $100,000 house. I'm sorry. They put that $100,000 house under contract for $60,000, and they sell that $60,000 contract for 10% of the potential profit to another investor. So they sell it for $4,000. Well, why would you do that if the seller on that property had a $60,000 note with Bank of America and you knew how to orchestrate a sub-2 purchase? Wouldn't you, instead of assigning or wholesaling, wouldn't you take that property and just buy it subject to the existing loan, and instead of making $4,000, make $40,000?
Right, I understand. So for those buyers, I mean, is that traditional? So let's say I make contact with a seller and coordinate a sub-2 transaction. within the massive category. The buyer, is that a traditional like MLS sale, or is that something?
Absolutely. Because going back to in the very beginning, I think we said anyway, maybe I didn't. We're not normal. Normal is I need a tax advantage. I overheard that buying houses is good. I look into the newspaper or a realtor magazine for the best looking real estate agent. That's why we put our pictures. It's the only reason to put our picture on an advertising is because we want to get picked based upon how we look. So we find the best looking person to us. We call him or her and we say, I want to buy a rental. And that person says, great, today's a great market to buy a rental. We're a little low on inventory, so we're writing offers at 105%. And you as the buyer don't know any better. You just want to buy a rental. You say, okay. So you go down and you buy a house at 105%. You have to put down a little bit more to cover the overvalue. No big deal. You get a loan, your passive income. Or let's look at it this way. You're not the mom and pop investor who wants to have a house for passive income and tax advantages and tax strategies, and because you overheard the term investor. But you're the true investor who buys property, fixes them up, rents them out. And I come along and I find the house that ARV's at 160. Its as-is value is 100. Because its as-is value is 100, I'm going to buy it for 60 because I only buy it 60 cents on the dollar or less. So its ARV is 160. Its as-is is 100. I can buy it for 60. I'm going to put it on the multiple listing service at $100,000, and I'm not going to do anything to the property.
Yeah, I love that.
You're coming along as the investor, the traditional investor who wants to put some sweat equity in it, do the rehab on it, spend $20,000, $25,000, earn $30,000, $35,000 in equity because you're doing it. Take 4 months to do it. It's what you love doing. Keep it as a rental. Do something with it. But that person has cash. They deal in cash. That's their market. That's how they buy. So majority of the people I sell to, overwhelming majority, are cash transactions.
Right.
So if we as investors really look at the microscope and go, okay, who's really the buyer out there? Well, the truly buyer is the person who does not know how to market to or negotiate with a seller to buy property at a high equity base.
Right.
Like I could buy a house out of my area. I mean, I understand real estate investing well enough to know how to do that.
Right.
For most people, there's so large of a disadvantage of buying it outside of your market, and the advantages are so overwhelmingly positive to buy inside your market. Stay in your market, and your market and my market and LA market and Florida market and New York market and Texas market and wherever you're at, markets are the same. Yes, some of them are slower than others, and some of them are more expensive than others and less expensive than others. But the underlying motivation of a prospect when they want to sell a house is the same. They're going to prison. They're getting a divorce. They don't want to be a landlord anymore. They're whatever it is, whatever the thing is for them, they're the same no matter where they're at. And it's not education based. It's not intelligence based. It's situational. So whatever mental or physical situation they're in will cause them to get rid of it. It's the same reason when I bought my Mercedes, I took my Hummer down and to the Mercedes dealership, who they don't sell Hummers, they sell Mercedes. I said, just give me, what do you think you can give me for it? They gave me a number. I was fine with it. I knew they were going to, polish it up and resell it and make $5,000, $10,000 on it. I didn't care. I wanted my Mercedes. Are done with the thing that you own. You don't really care if someone else makes money. You just want to get rid of it. And going back to the idea that people don't sell to us for the money, they sell to sell the property. which is different. Like if you had jewelry laying around the house and you sold your jewelry to like one of these gold exchange companies, or I buy jewelry or I buy gold or whatever, that's different.
Mm-hmm.
You're selling your jewelry for the money. You're not selling it because you don't want it anymore. You're selling it, I want to go get $500 for stuff that I normally don't use, and it's just laying around, and I need $500. Well, people don't sell houses for that reason. The mind frame is different. Yeah, you can do it anywhere. Here's the really cool part. You hold that property. Say you want to be passive, but you don't want 100% of your money tied up in equity. Well, so you don't want to do the 1 in 4. You want to keep some, sell some. Hold it for whatever the lender has for seasoning. So hold it for 6 months. Hold it for 90 days, whatever it is, and do a refi on it with a lender that allow you to cash out at 80 cents on the dollar, or 70 cents on the dollar, or 70 cents on the equity dollar. And so now, as long as you show seasoning and stability, then you're going to cash out. As long as you don't take so much money out that it causes that good income producing property to be a bad income producing property, you're fine. And borrowed money is never income. It's only income when you go ahead and sell it. So you've got to be conscientious of that too. So if you refinance something, say you bought it for 60, it was worth 100, you went down and you borrowed $80,000 after a few months after seasoning issues were gone and expired, and that $20,000, you're not paying taxes on it until you sell it. Well, the problem is, for some people, they spend it. So when they do sell it, they have a tax consequence, but they don't have any money because they spent the money. So you've got to be real conscientious of that. But there's also 1031 exchanges that you can start placing your money in and roll over the tax consequence.
Wow. Thank you very much. That was, in all honesty, that wasn't what I was calling about on any level, but it was good. That was information that I needed to hear because, it did open my eyes to other options.
And here's one of the hardest things for investors to get their head around is doing something that they wouldn't do. And so just because you wouldn't loan $55,000 to someone that you never met without doing a ton of due diligence on them and doing all these other things doesn't mean that another person won't. And they do it all the time. They don't do it like breathing air all the time.
Right.
But there's enough of them that do it that causes you to have a really good business model.
Thanks for listening to the Michael Quarles Real Estate Show. Get more info and stay in touch at michaelquarles.com.